Capgemini is headquartered in Paris, so we do have like our strongest and biggest contingent of people is in Europe. So I am curious to see, we have a annual conference that's called Gone Virtual that used to be outside of Paris every year, and now it's every Friday virtually for the time being. So it'll be good to to be back in person with people again. I'm sure there'll still be some fundamental, changes. I think that we'll see coming out of this, but I think people are going to be eager to be back in human contact once again.
With a focus on new work, I'm really curious to hear from you your thoughts on the transitions. And I think that I have this observation that there are a few people who have very clear ideas about how the future will impact our work routines and our processes. But then there are people who are used to hearing what they're supposed to do next, and they don't have this vision, they don't have this forecast, they don't have this outlook, and for them it's just radical change, and it's very hard. And I see organizations growing, and I call it the natural immune system against change, that they go like they start to say no to everything. And these two fronts are looking at each other, where you go like, okay, forget about the old concepts, this is the new idea. And they go like, I didn't ask for a new idea. So I'm curious to hear from you how you see the process, the transition, what forces you see coming or is already or facing in a huge organization that you just embarked. I want to say thank you for taking time, and I'm just like passing the virtual stage over to you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, one question is going to be doing an analysis of teams and figuring out who can stay permanently remote and who comes back into the office in some sort of hybrid capacity. So back when I was working at the hospital, I came into the office starting in August of last year, 2 days a week. So there was like probably 350 so of us that were reactivated, mainly the people that were working on building digital products, and we were working in a scaled agile environment. So we had a lot of socially distant but face-to-face working sessions in some of our, larger conference rooms that we would actually be together. So I think that most organizations are probably going to go with some sort of a hybrid model as far as how people will work going forward. At least that is what I hope. So I think right now, what I'm seeing, and I think, what people should be considering, or whether they're doing so or not, is actually taking an honest, long, hard look on the health and the well-being of their people, and what is the best way and location for them to work, and then defining sort of the next gen operating model around that to support that. And what's interesting, utilizing technology right now is, there's been also, I think, a large focus that sort of collided with the pandemic, as organizations have been reskilling and upskilling their workforce, and everyone is talking about this, technological skills gap, which certainly does exist. So how do you keep your finger on the pulse of your people if they're not physically in the office to know, what skills they need and how they're doing? So this is where I think we've seen a lot of new tools come in that can make recommendations to people using AI, so we can see, what decision support do they need, what courses or reskilling do they need, and also the impact of things like I started to experience at the hospital and experience with a lot of the clients that we work with now, as mainframes and data centers are being retired, and more data is getting moved to the cloud, and more roles are being impacted by things like automation being brought into the workforce and work processes. Then what do you do with those people? So I know, again, because Capgemini is based in Paris, that we, prior to my joining, the company just went through a reorganization, and a lot of things I found out yesterday took a while to become announced and roll out globally, just because of the fact that they had to, I guess, negotiate and communicate with the labor unions in Europe that are much stronger than what we have left as far as that goes in the United States. So there were some changes that the corporation was making that, needed to be, I guess, cleared or ratified or okayed, because there were some workforce changes that were impacting our own people. So I think that there's a tremendous amount of complexity right now, on top of which, there's still, quite a bit of popularity, which I'm a huge advocate of people working in more of an agile or scaled agile methodology. So within all of this, the workforce changes that have been brought on by COVID, plus other things that were already getting transformed just because of technology integration, there's a huge change going on in how we work. I think it is up to us now to make sure that we keep things human centric and inclusive, and also very much, data and insights driven and sustainable. And of course, making sure that this is all aligned to the purpose and strategy of the company. So there's a lot of a lot of moving parts. So there's many companies out there who like to use the term, intelligent HR, as far as describing what this fusion of business and technology looks like, and really creating the ability to deliver exceptional employee experiences. So I think that is a big focus at the end of the day. I think, for years and years, and of course, customer experience is important. I think from my days working in design and branding, I did a lot of work in the customer experience space. Now looking at employee experience, and, people for so many years were inspired by the likes of Zappos and other companies that really had exceptional employee experiences. I think slowly people are recognizing that, with reasonably minimal investment, this is possible anywhere and everywhere. And we should be looking at how we can improve our employee experience, and make our employees evangelists and advocates for our brand, whatever it is. And this applies, certainly very much in a cross sector, cross industry sort of way. To think about really what that means. And I think, as we started off by saying, more and more, we need to figure out what our virtual organizations look like. So I think we will, by the end of this year, in most parts of the world, be seeing some sort of return to work in some capacity. But I really, doubt, and the numbers and the data will tell, that employees are not keen to go back to a 5 day a week in the office scenario. So when we do bring people back into the office, we need to make sure that we're fueling them with very meaningful engagements when they're there. So it doesn't feel like they're just, sitting on their desk and responding to emails and on, Zoom calls all day. Like, how do we take advantage of the time when we're in the office, so we can make that a good time to deliver ways to really bring together, the culture, and focus and align on whatever business outcomes are important for that department or division of the company, to go back and have that sort of touchstone. So I think that the purpose and the use of the physical office is going to totally change and transform. And then I think also, Sarah, to your point, I can imagine in the future there being, more importance and emphasis of how employees are brought together in any sort of company offsite capacity, because those moments will become more meaningful than even they were before, whether it's for, some sort of reward or recognition, or just company or departmental gathering. I think those experiences are going to need to be, thought about and curated even more thoughtfully and carefully, so we make the most of our time together when we do bring people together as an entire team.
We met Aris Talik this week. He is in Tel Aviv, and he's a systemic thinker, and he ponders around the concept of thinking buddies. And the question is, kind of it goes in the same direction. When we have people coming to the office, it's not these people just working at their desk, their familiar desk. There must be something different than before. And I can imagine that this idea of thinking buddy is probably, you don't have a thinking buddy when you're working at home. And as we all have a Zoom fatigue, we don't want to have another virtual session to share thoughts. So that could be something. I don't know what you think about it. That the
Yeah,
work
I think that concept of thinking buddies is really amazing. And since I have just joined this role, I have an onboarding buddy who's another VP in the company. She's based out in the San Francisco office. And as you progress on your journey through your life of any corporation, you know, your role and the things that you might be concentrating on or looking after changes inevitably. So if you think about the concept of thinking buddies, and I always you know, on the design and build side, reflecting back to, you know, working on digital products, I'm a huge fan of pair computing. So taking the concept of, you know, having two developers working together. So I was always a fan of pairing up a designer and developer so they could work together and work with more agility and flexibility and bounce ideas off of each other in real time. So I think that this idea of thinking buddies is a good one, and it's, you know, probably worth, if a company was to institute something like this concept, that maybe your thinking buddy could change either every 6 months or every year, as you know, your focus and the direction of your role, or the business problems that you're trying to solve, or your client needs or area of concentration might change. So your type of thinking buddy you need might change. So I think that is a really cool concept.
I'd like to switch gears a little to hear from you what your thought in this direction is, and that's also because I participated. Johan curated with the Rotary Club a session with someone from Dubai, and Dubai is for me one of the lighthouse stories about smart cities and planning a city. Right, the whole city 50 years ago was Bedouins living in tents, and now it's a super city, a mega city with two amazing centers 25 kilometers apart, and everything is growing there. And let me mute you on here for a second. And everything is growing exponentially in the city, and they're talking about smart city. And my question goes in the direction of synchronicity. How much do you think organizations like Capgemini and big organizations with 6-digit employees should be working more together with municipalities to actually grow and support the growth of smart cities? Because it goes together, right? If you talk about the smart city and new work and where work is going, you can't separate them anymore, because workspace is just one other physical option, just like the city is another physical option to do your job and do your work.
Yeah, I think smart cities and, you know, companies like Capgemini and others working hand in hand is really important. And when I think about Dubai, it makes me laugh because, as you are all probably possibly painfully aware, the infrastructure of most cities in America is just pitiful right now. And when I consider, you know, what is possible, you know, whether in Dubai or some of the cities I've had a chance to do some work in Asia, it's like, you know, unbelievable to say that this is how things could be, but we're just sort of letting things languish on our side. And I think that public and private partnerships are good accelerators and catalysts to make that happen. I also, when I was at the tail end of my time at IBM, I was starting to do some work with the public sector and started getting into the smarter cities space. And it was like years after IBM had its Smarter Cities campaign that I said, maybe IBM was ahead of its time, because right now I think the Smarter Cities conversation is really starting to pick up some steam again. And maybe it was, thwarted for a time by COVID. But I think that there is a huge, potential. And the other thing that I think we'll see coming out of the pandemic, and this is how Capgemini is already starting to self-organize, we're creating around the world this sort of hub and spoke model of how we work. So if the hub were to be located, for instance, in a smart city, and then you have spokes to other, smaller cities or towns that you still have clients and your employee base engaged there, but there's like, for instance, in New York, our hubs are New York and Atlanta and Chicago and San Francisco in California. And that model replicates around the world as well. I think we could say it's interesting to ponder, if we were to really connect with the municipality of those cities and think about exactly what you said, Niki, this whole smart city concept. I think, again, given the timing of, the world has gotten turned on its head and is now in a state where we can, transform it or mold it into what we would like to. The time is now to make any systemic change, if there ever was one. And I don't know, like in the next 100 years, if we'll have this opportunity again, where everything's, sort of gotten the world, it like came to a halt, came to a pause. And now, as we start to emerge into whatever the next normal looks like, we can start establishing some new precedent for not only how we work, but the purpose and function of our cities, which I don't know how the trend has been in Europe, but we have seen in the States also a lot of people, as a result of COVID, leaving the city and moving either to, suburban areas or totally different parts of the country. So then that also opens up the question to, how and in what way will cities survive? So large cities like New York, I don't think are going to go anywhere, but some other cities may be asking themselves that question, and a lot of them have suffered tremendously over the past year, just because of revenue loss from normal things like public transportation and the like, just dropping to zero for a pretty long time. So I think that there's a huge role that can be played there. And probably, at least in the United States, the thing that's probably stopping that from happening is all of the, bureaucracy and complexity around public-private partnerships. But that's not to say it isn't possible.
Going back to the new work theme, which is super interesting, I want to share with you, I'm part of a program called Moonshot Pirates. And it's an Austrian initiative of 16 to 18-year-old students from school to invite them to the idea of moonshot thinking, bring them closer to exponential growth strategies, and explain them the sustainable development goals. And in 3 days boot camps, they identify problems that need to be solved and come up with projects and ideas. And it's a really amazing initiative founded by one of the TEDx organizers from the community. However, with one of the project leaders, I had a conversation just 2 days ago because they were presented their concept at TEDx Atlanta. And he said it's so interesting because everyone has been having a conversation about how the education system is fucked up for like, I don't know, 20 years or longer. And now we're in the situation where we have to make change and convert what we have and bring up what we think and talk about to virtual and digital. And what we have produced is just another fucked up education system, but now online. Right. Instead of taking the chance to do it right, we've just produced another fucked up system. And that is the language of a 17-year-old. And you just said we have the chance to do it right now because we kind of had a hard reset button by the lockdowns what are initiatives that you can share that Capgemini is bringing and thinking about, talking about, introducing, that the day after the COVID, the day where introduction back to working spaces is different than before?
Yeah, so I think on the reskilling side, and I appreciate the fact and absolutely agree because my kids have been doing Zoom remotely, and it's like the school system, as far as its attempt at digitization or digitalization, has been like pretty pitiful. It's, over the summer, we've been leveraging Khan Academy pretty heavily and things like that. And I, wish and hope that they're getting the right level of investment and revenue for expansion, because I think that that's like the closest to being a better model for education that I have seen. Um, so we have been working with a company called Neo Brain as far as being able to do skills evolution monitoring. And then we're working with Degreed. So we're using Degreed within Capgemini to fuel our own Capgemini Academy and University, and creating a list for ourselves of the hard and the soft skills curriculum that we need for our own employees, but can therefore do the same thing as well, working with any organization on their skilling strategy and their learning experience design and learning infrastructure, and creating that and ecosystem to empower people to not only acquire new skills, but motivate learning and create learning that feels more tailored and specific to them. So I think that's, all in the context of a corporate setting. I think how that applies to people that are in, primary school is a really good question, because as we're getting better at, I hope, workforce skilling on the corporate side, I think that attention needs to be paid to exactly the people that you're talking about, and even younger. What does that experience look like? And when I see like my kids learning geography with maps that look like they were printed 50 years ago, I'm scratching my head a little bit. That's like, well, why hasn't anything changed? And, education is totally not keeping up with the times here. Everyone is just too comfortable with teaching things in the same way and with the same examples of what they did last year. So I do think that there is a huge challenge or opportunity, that I should say, there.
Can you share a little about the program, and not only talk about education, but the program on walking back to office? Like, what are the things that are going to be differently when you're introduced being back at office to the team? So kind of the end of work from home as a default setting into the next version, partly work from home, partly be at office. As you mentioned before, being at office must be different than just desk, computer, and infrastructure. What are the things that you are working on? What are the things that how will Capgemini employees be introduced to a different version, and what is the different version of their workspace going to look like?
Yeah, so I think we are still figuring out exactly what our return to work strategy is going to be. I've seen other companies that are, selecting 2 or 3 days a week to be back into the office, or other companies that are doing sort of an A team or B team model. So people that are part of team A are in the office certain days a week, and people that are part of team B are in the office certain days a week. So it can, ultimately also radically cut down on people's real estate footprint as well, which is the other thing we haven't talked about too much here, that I know corporations are looking for efficiencies when it comes to space and their real estate footprint, and what that looks like going forward as well. But I think it is important too to consider, as we look at these new ways of working and return to the office, what we can do to make sure that when we ask people to come back to the office, are bringing them together in meaningful ways. both for work purpose and social purpose, to create that sense of community and culture, because that's really important. And for most people, and there's been a lot of studies and articles about the fact that introverts have been really thriving during the pandemic, because they don't need to be in the office and having so much face time. I think I have had a lot of good experiences as I have started returning to the office, just as far as, beginning to run workshops again, and being able to do, contextual inquiry around things, and just stuff that it's hard to do in a completely digital space. So I think that a lot of this is also going to require new office space design. And there's, I saw yesterday a presentation of a lot of different design and architecture companies out there have a lot of cool ideas when it comes to new office space design. But I think that there will need to be a rethinking around, how teams work and how teams collaborate, and finding ways to make the experiences when people are physically in the office more meaningful. So again, they feel like there's a purpose for them to be there, and it's not just showing that they're a diligent worker that's able to sit at their desk from 9 to 5.
And I can imagine that social spaces will have a different role.
Yeah, absolutely.
Probably the higher ratio on social spaces versus just desks. And
Mm-hmm.
also had a conversation about how the big rooms where hundreds of people working in the same room are going to switch to a social space, whereas the working environment might be more on the no sound, no voice. I want to really withdraw myself from people to focus. Whereas when I'm at the office, I want to be around people and interact. I'd also invite Sarah and Johan to be part of the conversation. And somewhere in between, I invited Ursula to join us because I just started a conversation with her about what I'm doing here. And she said she's interested in networking and innovation. So I thought having a conversation about new work might be interesting for her. That's why she joined late. She didn't come late. I invited her and she joined on a very short notice. So that's the reason why Ursula has joined us as well. But Sarah and Johan, and of course, Ursula, you're also invited just to unmute yourself and be part of the conversation. We have 8 minutes to the top of the hour, and I'm curious what your questions are. Maybe Johan, you'd like to start. I can imagine that picking up from your Dubai session on Monday, you might have some thoughts.
I will be very honest. Overall, from what I've seen, and I have friends in like top management positions in many of these IT companies, Facebook, Google. I'm less optimistic. And the main reason is, I had a discussion with a good friend who is a top manager at Facebook. And, she said, because I asked her, like, tell me really, how do you see these people, like the hybrid model, and, people who choose to be, let's say, more at home than at the office? And, the culture, which is in this kind of, so it's not a culture, but the discussion, which is in these management circles, in these companies, at least from what I see, is that, yeah, these people are weak. These people are, let's say, not, so they are kind of discussing, that those who go back to work, to the office, are like the ones who should get the reward, should get, promotion. This is one point. The second point, and I recently posted this and there was a big interaction. Many people agreed. The other thing about the hybrid model, what I see, as an issue is that those people, who stay, let's say, home, won't get the information. People who are at the office will get sooner the information, about the new project, new opportunity. They will be in those circles, like which, it happened to me, a few weeks ago. I went to the office for one day. I got more information. I got put into a project because it happened that I had a coffee with my manager. So all these things together make me think, that it's not that easy, maybe, as we think. So that's a bit my input on this whole kind of hybrid model. I'm really curious what you think about this.
I definitely agree that it's not as not so easy as we think, and I also definitely agree that being there in person, you do hear about opportunities first. You do have access to your manager, and just being seen and being present, like the old saying, out of sight out of mind, definitely holds true when and we're having a conversation like this. So I think, ideally, if the majority of the workforce were to come into the office 2 to 3 days a week, so that everybody is showing face to some extent, but everyone has some ability to take those 2 days a week that they're not in the office, which is how I was trying to structure my work over the past year and a half. It's like, if I was working on a presentation or some piece of thought leadership or budgeting for the next year, like things that you have to be like heads down and I need to focus for several hours, like do that stuff when you're at home and figure out, what you need to do to maximize your social interactions when you're in the office. But I think it's going to be very easy for people, like all too easy for people, to just revert back to the way that they worked before and what was successful or made them successful before. So I do definitely think that it's going to be a challenging road ahead of us. I don't want to insinuate that this is going to be easy by any means, but I do think that in the spirit of inclusion, we can look at inclusion in a lot of ways, and one of those ways is geographic inclusion, and the fact that we are going to need to be cognizant and be accommodating of people that are not necessarily having proximity to the office or in the office all of the time. And that's important to think about as well, because there's still, I remember back when I was working at IBM, my financial analyst was somewhere, I never saw her in person. She was somewhere in the middle of Georgia. I have no idea where. And she was tremendously talented and got me everything I needed, like on time, and was always available and accessible. And I don't know like what I would have done without her. And I never saw her one time. And she wasn't somebody who was even, necessarily a person that was aspiring to, advance, or like, she wasn't trying to become an executive. But I think that there's something to be said as well, which is also having like a long, hard and honest look at your employee base or your workforce, and saying, I remember having this conversation with our chief architect at Memorial Sloan Kettering, and he had just joined us from CVS and Aetna, and we were talking about the fact that there's some employees that just want to do their job and collect their paycheck, and they're not aspiring to like grow up the corporate ladder and advance their career to some height of heights. Like, they're just happy doing their job. And a lot of them do a really good job at just being happy doing their job. So, how do we make it easy for them to feel like they're thriving and successful and supported, and let people who just desire that of their life, like that's okay, and we need them, and they're like of great support and value to senior managers and executives and things like that. So I think that that's where we collectively need to really take a careful look at doing some different sort of employee segmentation and personas around who and what the composition of our workforce actually looks like, and how to best work with and serve those individuals.
I have one closing question, because we're getting close to the top of the hour, because it's been mentioned, it goes in this direction, being buy local in San Francisco and seeing work environments there. The work environments in Silicon Valley look a little like we make workplace your home place, but now it's switched because the home place has made the workspace. But one argument they always brought in was that there are serendipity engines, right? They produce environments where people meet serendipitous and have unplanned conversations with unplanned connections, to fruitful results. How do you see that happening in the next version of Workspace?
That's a really good question. And I think that I have always viewed living in New York City as in and of itself, and you could say this of any city, being a serendipity engine. Like you could bump into somebody at a restaurant, in the elevator, on the train, and whatever, and that becomes your next client, your next best friend, your next fill in the blank. And those exchanges and experiences are invaluable. And I think that the whole notion of what those serendipity engines look like in the future, and or how and if they could be created or manufactured in some other way, is a fabulous question.
Okay.
I would love to do more thinking about that, because I don't know that. I have an answer other than seeing that there is a great value in further exploration of that topic.
Liz, I love that conversation. We get to the top of the hour, and it's a pity that we had some tech hiccups in the beginning. And sorry for that if that caused delay induced by my ends. Thank you so much for taking time. And I feel like this is a conversation that has a lot of sequels where we go like, okay, let's meet again in 3 weeks or in a month and see what's now, and kind of follow this transition that we're in right now. Definitely wonderful seeing you again after 10 years. It's fun.
Wonderful seeing you too, and nice meeting everyone else. Thank you for joining.